because of laws that we made here in the Congress, the people of Alaska, particularly the native people, started living longer. Living longer. I've asked my colleagues, I've used this chart a lot, give me an indicator of policy success more important than the people you represent are living longer.
Senator from Alaska.
I want to thank my colleague, Senator Murkowski, on her remarks on the vote that we're getting ready to take on the CRA, dealing with the Central Yukon Plan. And I'm going to be a little bit briefer since she covered a lot of material and did a great job doing it. But I want to give my colleagues just a little sense of, these are the elements of why this plan, quote, plan, needs to be repealed by the U.S. Senate in part of a CRA. By the way, Mr. President, this is going to continue in the vein of what we did with your great state, Montana, and North Dakota, the last 2 days on the Senate floor with these CRAs. And what's going on here? Well, we all know what's going on here, both with regard to Montana and with regard to North Dakota, and of course with regard to Alaska. The previous administration came in and said, even though it's probably illegal, we're going to try and lock up these states because we don't want resource development on these states. Now imagine, Mr. President, Senator Murkowski mentioned the Central Yukon Plan that the Biden administration issued. We didn't want it. Nobody really wanted it in Alaska. It's almost 56 million acres, okay? That's the size of Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania combined. Just that one plan. Gives you a sense of how big my state is. But can you imagine a president of the United States, if you were a Republican, telling the people of Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania that they're going to be saddled with a plan they didn't want to large up large swaths of their land, destroying thousands of jobs, which is what this plan would do? Nobody would accept that. This plan, scheme of the Biden administration disregards local voices, ignores protections guaranteed under federal law, ANCSA and ANILCA, and undermines the ability of Alaska Native corporations who did not want it to access and responsibly develop their lands, which Congress gave them in the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act in 1971. So these are the key elements of why it's a problem, Mr. President, and it's also part of a long pattern with the Biden administration that I never tire of reminding people. This is the chart we call the last frontier lockup. The last administration issued 70 executive orders and executive actions singularly focused on Alaska. 7-0. I confronted President Biden in the Oval Office respectfully when we were at 48. Here's the list of them, by the way, Mr. President, of the 70. That's each one, 7-0, only against Alaska. And I said, Mr. President, why are you doing this? Why are you going to war with my people? Working families, Americans. You're sanctioning Alaska more than you sanction Iran and Venezuela, and they're terrorist regimes. You know, he didn't know. I don't think he knew what was going on, but it was wrong. In this, by the way, Mr. President, this Central Yukon Management Plan was one of the 70 that we didn't want, that the vast majority of the Native people didn't want. Certainly that the Native Corporation Doyon, most of their land, they didn't want it. So, Mr. President, what we need to do instead, as opposed to locking up Alaska, as I said to President Biden, it's not good for Alaska, sir, but it's also not good for America, is we need to do this. Unleash Alaska's extraordinary resource potential. And by the way, thank you, President Trump. This is a day one executive order, one of the first executive order President Trump issued when he came into office in January and said, we're not going to lock up Alaska, we're going to unleash it. So, in his executive order, we also have essentially getting rid of this Central Yukon Management Plan from the Biden administration. So thank you, Mr. President. Now my colleagues, I'm asking all of them, and I'm particularly asking my Democratic colleagues, because I want you guys to show that you're not so anti-Alaska. The Democratic Party at the national level has become the anti-Alaska party, an anti-Alaska Native party. So many things that we care about in my state, in the interest of the Native people, all my colleagues on the other side of the aisle make it a point to try to crush us in our opportunity and cancel Native voices. Yes, Indigenous voices. You're always working to cancel them. Here's your opportunity, Democrat colleagues, to vote yes on this CRA. Listen to me and Senator Murkowski, the people who represent the people in the great state of Alaska. Listen to President Trump. So that's what we want. And I'm going to just mention one final thing, Mr. President, why this is so important, why I get really animated about this with all my colleagues. A lot of people have seen this chart, but I like showing it because it's a really important issue. This is a chart from the American Medical Association from 1980 to 2014, and it had life expectancy in America, okay? So the places that are blue, darker blue, purple, if you look at the chart, these people are living longer. Purple is 13 years. So in 24 years, certain parts of America, the life expectancy of Americans increased by 13 years. Now, unfortunately, in our great nation, look at the yellow, orange, and red on this chart, that's actually life expectancy decreases. We, of course, nobody wants that. A lot of that was the opioid epidemic and things. But guess which state had the greatest increase in life expectancy of any place in America from 1980 to 2014? According to the American Medical Association, Alaska, especially the North Slope region, interior Alaska, Aleutian Island area, Southeast Alaska. So what happened 1980 to 2014 in that part of Alaska? I'll tell you what happened. Responsible resource development happened. And people started living longer. They got jobs. They got water and sewer, flush toilets, gymnasiums, health clinics, things that the lower 48 just takes for granted that we didn't have in a lot of our state because we had responsible resource development, mining, oil and gas on the North Slope, fishing out on the Aleutian Island chains, all because of laws that we made here in the Congress. The people of Alaska, particularly the Native people, started living longer. Living longer. I've asked my colleagues, I've used this chart a lot, give me an indicator of policy success more important than the people you represent are living longer. There isn't one. That's the most important. The people you represent are living longer. Why? Because of responsible resource development. There's no doubt. Here's the chart. Alaskans are living up to 13 years longer. Now, Native people in my state unfortunately started at a real low level, some of the lowest levels of life expectancy, but because we're developing our resources responsibly, my constituents are living longer. So when you have these groups, and you have the Biden administration, and no offense, you have a lot of my Senate Democrat colleagues try to shut down my state, which they always do, you know what you're doing? You're actually impacting people's lives and how long they live. So, Mr. President, this is really important for me and the people I represent. This is a good opportunity to tell the Biden administration, hey, you're not going to do this. You're not going to do it to Montana. You're not going to do it to North Dakota. And you're certainly not going to do it to Alaska because you're going to negatively impact people's lives. So I really hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and I really hope at least one or two Democrats have the courage to come and say, you know what, Dan, you've been talking about this for 10 years. I agree with you. I'm going to vote to rescind this Biden CRA or this Biden Yukon management plan that nobody wanted to help your state and help America. One more thing, Mr. President. In this part of the state where that central Yukon management plan is, like I said, 56 million acres, 51 of the 56 critical minerals that our country needs are in this area. You know, I was in an armed services hearing recently, and everybody, including a lot of my Democrat colleagues, like, gosh, we're so reliant on China for critical minerals. What can we do? I can tell you what you can do. Quit shutting down my state. Let us develop critical minerals in Alaska as opposed to relying on them from China. So that's another reason this is important for national security of our country. And with that, I ask all my colleagues to support this CRA, and I yield the floor.
In a fiery speech on the Senate floor, Alaska Senator Dan Sullivan called on Congress to overturn the Central Yukon Land Management Plan, a massive 56 million-acre policy enacted under the Biden administration. Sullivan argues the plan would strangle Alaska's economy, undermine Native communities, and threaten national security by restricting access to key natural resources. The proposal, which covers an area the size of Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania combined, was issued without broad support from Alaskans, according to Sullivan and fellow Senator Lisa Murkowski. He claims it is part of a pattern of executive actions aimed at halting development across Alaska. The Biden administration has issued 70 executive orders targeting Alaska, Sullivan said. You're sanctioning my state more than Iran or Venezuela. Sullivan accused federal agencies of ignoring local voices and Alaska Native corporations, saying the plan violates rights established under the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971. He also criticized Democrats for what he described as an anti-Alaska and anti-Native American stance, urging them to support the Congressional Review Act resolution to repeal the plan. The senator contrasted President Biden's policies with those of former President Donald Trump, who, on his first day in office, signed an executive order promoting resource development in Alaska. Sullivan praised Trump's approach for unleashing Alaska's potential and creating jobs. Sullivan pointed to data from the American Medical Association showing that from 1980 to 2014, life expectancy in Alaska increased by up to 13 years, especially in native regions. He attributed that improvement to responsible resource development, which brought infrastructure such as clean water systems, health clinics, and schools to rural areas. There's no better measure of success than people living longer, he said. That's what responsible development has done for Alaska. The senator also raised national security concerns, noting that the Central Yukon region holds 51 of 56 critical minerals identified as essential to the U.S. economy and defense. He warned that blocking development in Alaska only deepens America's dependence on China for those resources. Sullivan closed his remarks with a direct challenge to Senate Democrats. You're not going to do this to Montana, North Dakota, or Alaska. Have the courage to stand up for the people who actually live there. The Senate is expected to vote on the CRA resolution that would overturn the Central Yukon Plan later this week.